And now it's Little Italy Podcast and the Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for tuning in today for Deborah Kobylt Live and our Little Italy podcast. And boy, am I excited to introduce my guest, Gary Vitti, longtime Lakers head athletic trainer. He wrote this book, 32 Years of Titles and Tears from the Best Seat in the House. We've got an awful lot to talk to you about, Gary. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Deborah.
Yeah, just so excited. Okay, Gary, let's start, if you don't mind, because I always say, we learn a lot about a person where they're at now by going back quite a bit, like to who they were as kids. You are of Italian descent. Tell me a little bit about where you were born and, I don't know, what was life like growing up as a kid for you, Gary?
Well, I'm a first generation Italian
Oh,
American. My dad was born in a small village, probably about 90 minutes from Rome, up in the mountains, peasant village. He was born in 1921. He actually passed away in 2018, so he was 97
mm,
when he passed. And you know, at I guess 14 years old, around 1935, he was being conscripted into Mussolini's avant-gardista, which was the Italian version of the Hitler Youth. And in those days, there wasn't any work. It was a massive depression in all of Europe, and especially Italy. And so my grandfather came to America, to New York, and then one by one started bringing my father's siblings over, his older sisters. He was the youngest, and
mm,
they all worked in a sweatshop. My grandfather was a laborer. My dad explained to me that people that came from this particular village, their dream was to be an opera singer, but nobody really achieved that dream. That would be sort of like me growing up and dreaming to be a professional athlete, right? You want it as a kid, and you think you can do it, but nobody ever really does. And so then your next choice would be to be a tailor, because it's a clean job and it's inside where it's warm. And then
ah,
if you weren't delicate enough to be a tailor, then you became a shoemaker, which wasn't as delicate, but it was still inside, warm. And if you weren't delicate enough to be a shoemaker, then you became a stone cutter, and that's heavier labor, and it's outside, and you're working in the wintertime, and you're freezing. And if you didn't have that skill, then you became what was known as a ditch digger. And so that was my
mm,
grandfather. He was a ditch digger. He worked on the Chrysler Building in New York when they built
oh,
it. And so one by one, they brought the children over. My grandmother never came over. They referred to her in those days. Those women were referred to as white widows, because they were actually married, but they never saw their husbands. They lived on different continents. And the plan
mm,
was to send money back, and then everybody would go back to the old country and live happily ever after. But of course, that never happened. You meet people, and you get married, and you have children, and then you establish roots. And so that's what happened with us. My dad met my mother, whose parents came from the same village. So both of my grandparents came from the same village. So my mother says it wasn't an arranged marriage, but I think it pretty much was. My mother was one of 10, 8 girls and two boys, and my dad kind of went in there and took a look at, I think one of them was married at the time, so looked at the other seven and picked my mom, and they got married, and had my two sisters, and then me, and we grew up um, in Stamford, Connecticut, about 40 miles from the center of Manhattan. So dad moved us out of New York and into Connecticut. And my life was sort of like when I walked out the door, I walked into America. But when I got home and walked in the front door of our house, I stepped back into Italy. And we grew up with really old school Italian morals, values, and ethics. And I'm very thankful for that today. But it probably, looking back as a child, it wasn't easy all the time because the other kids were just like regular American kids, and we didn't have that sort of upbringing.
Yeah, but you probably had the best lunch at school, right? Because I always had like the meatball sandwiches and all these great lunches I'd be unwrapping, and everybody had like a jelly sandwich on Wonder Bread. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So, am I right about that?
absolutely right. I actually wanted a peanut butter and jelly
Me
sandwich
too.
for lunch. My mother wouldn't give it to me, you know.
No, my mother wouldn't either. She'd say they don't care, but I care. So she'd be up at like 4 in the morning making my sandwiches, my tuna, whatever. Hysterical to have those memories. Gary, I think it's on page 50 of your book. You said you were the Italian American kid with a failed sports career, but you found yourself amid sports greatness. The rest is a 32-year history of working side by side with Hall of Famers, and the rest is history. Tell me, what were you like as a kid in sports? I guess you said it right there. And then let's jump a little bit to you were working at a university and you got the call from the Lakers. So let's talk a little bit about your very early sports career and then jump to college.
Okay, so where we grew up, Stamford, Connecticut is a real sports town. We actually had
Yeah.
a lot of sports figures that lived there. Jackie Robinson actually retired in Stamford, Connecticut. Some of the old school New York Giants fans will remember Andy Robustelli, who was captain of the New York Giants and all-pro defensive end. He lived there. I grew up with all of his children. We all went to the same parochial school. Bobby Valentine, very famous baseball player and baseball
Yeah.
manager. He was like my sister's age. Both of my sisters are 6 and 7 years older than me. So, I grew up in this really great sports town, and as a child, I was actually pretty good. I mean, playing Pop Warner and Little League and Tiny League and Babe Ruth. But then by the time I got to high school, the talent level just really soared. The size of the kids were a lot bigger and stronger than me, and so I was too small to play football. I was the last cut on the baseball team, but I made the freshman JV basketball team. And I'm not exactly sure. I described this incident in the book. I'm not exactly sure what happened between this particular coach, and he happened to be Italian, by the way, and myself. But we really didn't like each other. And he tried to run me off the team, and I wanted to quit, but I refused to. I said, "Let me finish the season because I'm not a quitter, and then I'll never ever play organized sports again." And that's exactly what happened. I got jobs here and there. I always had money, because if you're playing sports all the time, there's a sacrifice there. So I wasn't particularly unhappy about it. I was more unhappy when I was actually playing. And so I was fine. And then somewhere along the way, I was introduced to sports medicine. That's a whole podcast in and of itself. So I'll just
Yeah.
leave it there that I was introduced to it. And I went to graduate school, and a lot of stars lined up for me. So in 1979, I was living in New York City. I moved from Manhattan to Salt Lake City, Utah. There were very few athletic training programs in the country. The University of Utah had a great program. It was a little circuitous, but I got into that program. I actually went there for a meteorology degree, but then matriculated into the sports medicine program. Well, 79 on the campus of University of Utah is the same year that Magic Johnson and Larry Bird played each other for the NCAA championship on the campus of the University of Utah.
Wow.
Same year that the New Orleans Jazz moved to Utah and became the Utah Jazz. Same year that Gary Vitti moved from New York to Salt Lake City and entered the sports medicine program. Finished my master's degree, started my PhD. Word got around. There weren't a lot of PhDs in athletic training in those days. Now there's a ton. Word got around about me through pro sports because the Utah Jazz were there, and I was doing some part-time work for them. And I was offered a position at the University of Portland as the head athletic trainer and an adjunct assistant professor. Took that job, was there for a couple of years. The Lakers had just won 2 championships, and they were looking to modernize their sports medicine area. And Jerry West called me and says, "Your name's been floating around, and we'd like to talk to you." Well,
Hmm.
Jerry West. I mean, that's like my boyhood idol, right? I was a New York Knicks
Right,
fan, but if I also loved the Lakers because it was West
right.
Coast. It was cool, and as long as they weren't playing the Knicks, I was rooting for the Lakers and Jerry
Right.
West, right? And so, believe it or not, his secretary calls me after I spoke to him and said, "We're sending you a first class ticket." I had never flown first class before. I should tell you this, that I was still working on my PhD now at Utah in absentia, and really all I wanted to do was be a college professor in sports medicine. I'd already had a little taste of the NBA with the Jazz, and it was not a goal of mine to go into professional sports. But Jerry West calls you, the Lakers call you, you pick up the phone, and
Yeah.
then his secretary says, "We're sending you a first class ticket." I never flew first class before, so that was pretty cool. And then she tells me Jerry West is going to pick you up at the airport. So really? She goes, "Yeah, he'll be in a navy blue Mercedes with tan interior." I had never been in a Mercedes before. She went on to say, "Well, he's 6'4", and that's when I interrupted her and said, "I know what he looks like." And lo and behold, I walk out of LAX, and there's Jerry West curbside, leaning against a navy blue Mercedes with tan interior. I get in the front seat, and we drive down Century Boulevard to the great, fabulous Forum at the time, and you know, I'm sitting in the car with Jerry West. I don't know how else that should be kind of self-explanatory what that feeling would be like for a 30-year-old kid still, right?
Mm.
And we go to the Forum, and it's 1984 now, right? So it just happens that it's the '84 Olympics. And the day that I'm interviewing with Jerry West and Pat Riley, two of the biggest names in professional basketball, is the same day that USA basketball is playing Spain for the gold medal in the '84 Olympics. So
Wow.
it's just an electric area, and I just go from not being interested so much, but wanting to hear what it was all about, to all of a sudden being really interested. Um,
Jerry,
one of the
no, no, wait, I just called you Jerry. What am I saying? Hang on a minute. Gary,
yeah, yeah.
what did they ask you? Do you remember one of the questions? Were you nervous when you were answering these questions? Because that's like a pivotal point for anybody, right? For anybody young who's listening to this story who goes, how did he handle this? Probably nervous, probably couldn't even believe he was talking to these great people. Do you remember what they asked you? Do you remember what you answered?
Sure. And the answer about being nervous, first, I'll tell you this. I was so confident in my abilities, and not to knock anybody, but I felt that they were so backward in sports medicine. And let's talk about that for a second. So,
Sure.
sports medicine, let's say this, that there's been trainers around since the gladiators, but sports medicine as a discipline is probably only about 50 years old. And so for me, we're talking about 40 years ago. So it was only 10 years in. And today, it's much more evidence based than it was 40 years ago. But as it was changing and becoming more modernized, I was at the forefront and the cutting edge of that. And so that I saw myself as a valuable asset, and I was not intimidated going into the interview. You might be the Los Angeles Lakers and the greatest in basketball, but I'm Gary Vitti, and I'm really good at what I do, and so
Mm.
I've earned the chance to be sitting in front of you and discuss this, and so the conversation was more like, well, how would you do this? How would you do this? How would you handle a player if you wanted him to do this and he told you, "No, I'm not doing it"? Those
Mm.
sorts of things. Not and also, what is your philosophy? What was your philosophy about nutrition? What was your philosophy about flexibility? What was your philosophy about strength training? Because strength training really didn't exist in the NBA at the time, and I was a real proponent of it. And Pat Riley was very, very progressive. and so he really wanted to hear my feelings about that, which I described somewhat in the book.
Hmm.
And and so I really kind of felt like I earned the right to be there. So I really wasn't nervous. I was very candid with them, and I said, listen, I'm not sure that this is what I want to do. I mean, the only reason why I'm here is because you're the Lakers, you know?
Right.
And I said, I see my future in front of a classroom, in a performance laboratory, doing research, and taking the information that I'm learning and then extolling it out to the athletic population. And Pat Riley said probably the most important words in that interview. And he said, well, you could do what you want to do here, but you can do it with the greatest athletes in the world. And that kind of was like let a light bulb off in my head.
Yeah.
My interview with Jerry West was a little bit different. Coincidentally, they fired Paul Westhead, who was the coach of the Lakers, and that's how Pat Riley became the coach. They fired him in Salt Lake City while I was working for the Jazz. So the day that all happened, I was in the arena just on the other bench. And the rumor was that Magic Johnson had him fired. And, we can discuss whether that's true or not. But, I'm talking to Jerry West, and I'm saying, listen, I was there. I saw what happened. I'm going to quit my job at the university and come here, and then Magic doesn't like my mustache, and I'm out the door. And I said, who am I loyal to? And we had that kind of conversation. And Jerry said to me, well, I'm going to let Pat Riley make the decision as to who he's going to hire, because that's the person that he's going to have to work with, the most. And if you get the job, and I hope you do because I like you, I want you to remember one thing. And he kind of leaned back in his chair and he pounded his chest. He said, I'm the boss. And I took that to heart, and I had a very, Pat left. I think we were together about 5 or 6 years, and he left the team, but Jerry West was there a lot longer, and him and I all of us are close very still today. And Jerry was a magnificent person to work for, and I was very, very fortunate to have both of them along with some of the greatest athletes that have ever walked the planet Earth.
I've interviewed a few folks from the Lakers, Jeannie Buss, Byron Scott, to name a few. And I just started watching this docudrama, right, on HBO, which I heard that you decided not to be a part of. Can you talk to me very briefly about that? Because then I really want to get into the book and the lessons learned and some great stories from being the head athletic trainer. Go ahead.
Sure. I'm actually in 2 episodes. So they called me through Rick Fox. Rick Fox was one of our former players, and he's big in the Hollywood scene. And he said, listen, HBO wants to talk to you. There might be a consulting gig in it for you. You willing to talk to him? I said, sure. So I went down and talked to a whole room full of people. And the book hadn't been completed yet, but I was very open about my knowledge of Showtime and told them I was writing the book and that they should read it when it's done. And they did. And so at some point they called me and said, listen, we're not going to have your character in the show. There's not going to be a Gary Vitti in the show, but we want you in the show. And I go, well, I don't get it. And apparently in Hollywood, there's something that's called an Easter egg. And I was an Easter egg, meaning they dressed me up like a scout. I had an afro and sideburns and a polyester outfit, and they made me look like a scout. And I was in the war room with Bill Sharman and the guy that was playing Bill Sharman, Brett Cullen, and Jason Clark's playing Jerry West, and all these other people. And the idea of this Easter egg is that if you're a real Laker fan, you're watching this, and then all of a sudden you go, wait a minute, is that Gary Vitti? Yeah, so that's an Easter egg.
I love it.
Okay.
So that was an Easter
egg. But I had no idea. I hadn't seen the script or anything like that. And very early on in the shooting, I realized that they were mischaracterizing Jerry West. I mean, they really make him look like a drunken lunatic. And I've known Jerry now for 38 years, and
Yeah.
I've never seen the man drunk. I've never seen him curse at anybody the way they've portrayed him to be. And so after the first day of shooting, so my contract read that it'd be a minimum of 2 days. I have a SAG card, so they had to pay me scale. It'd be a minimum of 2 days and possibly 3. So after the first day, I called Rick Fox and I said, Foxy, these guys got Jerry all wrong. I said, this isn't good. And he said, well, let me talk to him. So he went and spoke to them, and then they came back to me on day 2 of the shooting, and they said, listen, we understand what you're talking about, but you need to understand this is not a documentary. It's fiction. And I said, yeah, but people that don't know the guy are going to think it's real, you know? And so we shot the second day, and it was more of the same. And they called me and said, we want to option the third day, and we want to offer you 2 more for a total of 5 days. And I said, listen, you know, I signed up for 2 and I possibly 3. Okay, so I'll do the third day because I signed up for it, but I want you to know that I really don't want to do it. I don't feel comfortable with this, and I'm definitely not doing the other 2. And they asked me why, and I told them because of Jerry West, the mischaracterization. I don't want to be a part of it. And it wasn't acrimonious in any way. I mean, they said, we understand, okay?
Yeah.
And they let me go, okay? And so I left, truth be told, I left about $15,000 on the table, which, as a retired guy on a pension, you can always, I mean, it's not going to change your life, but 15 grand is still 15 grand. And so, you know, I walked off the set. And like I said, it's not acrimonious. There's no enemies there, but it is really a gross mischaracterization, not just of Jerry Buss. I will tell you this. Everybody there was magnificent to work with. Everybody.
Yeah.
From the parking attendant to the makeup people to the other actors. John C. Reilly, if you didn't know, you would think you were in front of Jerry West. I mean, he walked like him. He talked like him. He smoked like him. You know, it's just that he did things that the script called him to do that Jerry Buss couldn't jump up on a desk and start screaming at everybody. That wasn't the kind of man he was, you know. And so kind of that's what happened. And
that's what happened.
So yeah, that's what happened. So,
but that's the way though, right? We all know that with docudramas. I'm very clear when I watch these that I'm really not watching a true story. It's based on something that may have been a true story, right? And they just put in the people and the names and the famous names that we know. So I just wanted to clear that up because that's good to know as people are watching it from your point of view.
Comment on that. Because this is what I told them to do.
Yeah.
I said the Godfather is loosely based on real people. You know, Johnny Fontaine's supposed to be Sinatra, right? But they don't have Sinatra's name in there. You know, Don Corleone was supposed to be Costello, right? You know, but they don't use his real name. You could have done the same thing. You could have made a fictional show about some basketball team, you know, in the 80s with the short shorts and the whole bit. And you could even use purple and gold. You know what I mean? You didn't have to use real names because now people think that it's real, and it's not. It's not even close to being real.
The job of a head athletic trainer, particularly for the Los Angeles Lakers, what do? You're pretty much intimately involved with these players, right? I mean, it's said in your book that one of their kids gets sick. They call you before they call the pediatrician, for example, right? I mean, you know these people intimately. Tell me what the job entails. It's probably so much.
Oh. So the bottom line is that you are in charge of the health care and well-being of the players, okay? It kind of extends further than that to the coaches and almost everybody in the organization. we have team physicians of all different specialties, but they're there for games, and then if you need to send them in, have a place to send them to, a sports medicine clinic. But the guy that's with them all the time was me. And you commented about the pediatrician. I would say, what are you calling me for at 3 o'clock in the morning? Why didn't you call the pediatrician? And the answer was always because I knew they wouldn't pick up the phone, and I knew you would. Okay, and so you travel with them. You basically live with them. You see them more than you see your own family, and it's hard to describe all the things that come under that sports medicine umbrella. I mean, the easy stuff is, like I said, the health and well-being, the conditioning, the strength training, the nutrition, the flexibility, even the sports psychology. But it kind of goes a little bit deeper than that. All of the management people, ownership and management of a team's building, the edifice, is all going to be on the second floor. The basketball area, or what we call basketball operations, is all going to be on the first floor, meaning the basketball court, the weight room, the training room, the hydrotherapy area, the locker room, the players' lounge, the kitchen, all of those things. I mean, when we build a practice site now, you wouldn't believe, we even have a barber shop, and we have to put a barber shop in the practice site because when you're trying to recruit a free agent, you want to have all the bells and whistles. You want them to bring their dirty laundry to practice and hang it in their locker, and then they go out and practice, and the cleaners come and pick it up, and then after practice, all their suits are clean and hanging in the closet. They take it back home. They don't do anything. All they got to do is show up. That's all they got to do. Okay, and sometimes they can't even do that. Okay, so you're in charge of all of these things that have to do with the players and the coach's life to try to create an atmosphere of belonging. You don't want your atmosphere to be like military because you want them to be able to express themselves and be individuals, but at the same time, you kind of need to have this military mentality, which is kind of the no man left behind. I've done some work at the Naval Hospital in San Diego, and I go into the prosthetics area and the physical therapy area, and you meet military guys that are amputees, missing an arm or a leg, and you ask them, if you could do it all over again, what would you do? And they said, I'd go back right now with one arm. Why? Because my brothers are back there. Well, that you kind of want that mentality that you want to sacrifice a piece of yourself for the good of the team. And so, to do that, everybody has to be on the same page, the coaches, the players, and myself. Are you there?
I think we lost her, but she will be back here shortly.
Okay.
All right.
I see two of me.
Yeah, that's our feed coming back to you. So let's look here.
Is everybody else seeing this?
Yeah, in fact, I don't know how deep that you want to get into your past with each individual player, such as Magic Johnson. I know she said you were. Hold on, she's texting me. She's saying, hold on. She said she lost her internet.
Well, Steve Jobs says reboot.
Right.
And update your software.
She says I'm there, but I do not see her. Let's see. She said she's coming back right now. The joys of the internet.
Yeah. I'm just glad it's yours, not mine.
Right?
Yeah. That was Duke barking in the background, by the way.
I was going to say, I heard the dog. How old's your puppy?
He is 9. I rescued him 6 years ago when I retired. He's half Great Dane, half Pit.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
what a combo!
He's a beast, and you could tell by his bark. So
yeah,
I think that was either the Amazon man or FedEx, and he just was saying hello.
Yeah, I bet you that bark keeps the anybody away from the the door.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
here comes
he's
Deborah. So we're gonna
sure
let her back on.
There you are.
I don't know what happened. Can you hear me and see me?
Yep. You're
Tony, just put it back, and I'm gonna have to edit this in later. So you can still run it live. And what is it going to be? Part 2? We're going to call it Part 2. Gary Vitti Part 2.
Yep, Part 2. Let's do that.
Okay, because at least it's there, and I will then edit it later. I'm going to have to do that.
Okay. No problem.
Can you? Can I just tell the other person that? Oh, geez. Sorry, Gary. I've never had this before, Gary. I mean, right? Isn't that true?
You don't have to worry about me. I'm good. I'm retired. I got no place to go.
Just let me tell my other person that I'm going to be late. So, sorry. Sorry about this. Let me just tell.
You want to ask me something and I'll talk while you're doing that?
No, I'm just texting all